Hi, and welcome to FlossTube episode number 11. I'm Jean Farish, and I'm so glad that you're here with me. In today's episode, we have a long arm cross stitch tutorial. I'm going to give you a few more notes about pulled thread embroidery, just some general things, but I am going to give you a very specific tutorial on the long arm cross stitch. And I'm going to talk to you about two holiday designs. One is a freebie that's on my blog. It's available for you now. And the other is a Christmas design called Hearts Come Home at Christmas. This is a circular sampler, and I'm going to set it up as a stitch along. So I'll give you more details about that in just a little bit too. So the freebie design is for Thanksgiving, or really any time that you want to give thanks, and it's using a motif from the Jane Hattersley sampler. So when I was stitching on this week, I did a couple of more motifs in that center area. And while I was doing that, I thought, this basket of fruit just looks like a Thanksgiving design. And I talked to my daughter Elizabeth about it, and she volunteered to stitch it. And I'm going to be doing the finishing. So I will bring you up to date about that as we're going along. I don't think it's going to take her very long to stitch it, because it's a pretty quick design. And like I say, you can just go to my blog, jeanfarishneedleworks.com, and download the PDF from there. If you decide to stitch it along with us, please join my Facebook group called JFNSAL, which stands for Jean Farish Needlework Stitch Along. And you can show your progress there. But also, if you participate in Instagram, that's another good place too, to show your progress. And if we use the hashtag JFNSAL, then other people that are participating can find your photos by following that hashtag. Now, let me confess here, I am new to Instagram, so please be patient with me, and I will be happy to get advice and hints and more information about how-tos for myself that I can then pass on to others, but pretty sure that's how it works. Hearts Come Home at Christmas was my first and only attempt at a circular sampler, and I will just clue you in here. Doing a traditional sampler border in the round is not for the faint-hearted when it comes to designing it. It's very easy to stitch, but it was a challenge to design it and get it so that it was even, and so that motifs were evenly spaced, and so that the curve was geometrically correct. So it really tapped into some of my math skills as well as my designing skills. But it was fun to design, and I am happy to share that with you. So right now, I'm going to put it in my Etsy store at a special price of $5.90 for the next couple of weeks. Let me see. I think what I decided, yes, until October 20th. At midnight my time, which is Eastern time. And then as of October 21st, it will go up to the regular price, which is $10. So if you want to participate in that stitch along, what you'll need to do is go to my Etsy store and purchase and download the PDF from there. After the 21st, it will go back to the regular retail price. And I'm hoping by then that it will also be in some of the local needlework stores that you can purchase it there. So what I am hoping to do, and I'll do my best to keep to this, but I thought that this would be a good project to kind of just go step by step through the process. From the time I cut my fabric to finding the place to begin, and especially since it's a motif type sampler, how you get from one little motif to another without gritting, without having to make yourself crazy with lots and lots and lots of counting, and just some little tips and little how-to things that help me, things that I employ every time I sit down and stitch. These are not extraordinary things, and I'm sure that many of them, if not most of them, are things that you're already doing. But just in case, it'll be good for beginners, and I think it may be good for people who want to brush up a little bit too. But regardless, it's kind of fun to be part of a community and to be stitching the same thing at the same time. So if you want to be a part of that, then, you are more than welcome to do that. So what I'm going to do is spend about an hour every week making a videotape of the steps that I'm taking at that point. So you probably will need to watch them in order, and I will number them in such a way that it will be easy to know which one to start with in case you don't start with us whenever I get the first one up. But it'll be, part of my YouTube FlossTube video offerings, and I'll make them public, not private, so that anybody can find them. And I also want to say that I think that most of the tips that I give you will be things that you can apply to other needlework projects. They will not be things necessarily that are unique to that project. So I'm hoping to have the first one up next Wednesday, which is, oh golly, what's that date? Hold on a second. Need to put my glasses on. October 14th. So I'm hoping that by the 14th, I'll have the first one up. And like I say, it'll be very basic. Here's my piece of fabric. Here's how I find the place. Here's how I decide where to begin. Here's how I find that place to begin. And so if you want to stitch along with us, you are more than welcome to do that. So, oh, and one other thing to say about Hearts Come Home at Christmas Stitch Along. The chart will be charted for both Cosmo and for DMC. So whichever one you like to stitch with and that you can find available either at your local needlework store or online, then you'll be able to get your supplies and stitch along with us. So much has changed in the needlework industry since I first published my first design in 1981. And probably the biggest change for you, the consumer, are the wide variety of fabrics that are available and the wider available of threads that are available. My first published design was Janet Irving. At the time, I lived in New Jersey, and my only local needlework store was a very fine needlepoint shop, which is still there in Ocean City, New Jersey. But when it comes to counter cross stitch, I really lived in a cross stitch wasteland. I didn't know anybody who did it. And really the only way I became exposed in the late 70s was because I went to college here in North Carolina, and I was down here visiting friends and looking at their handicrafts, and I'm like, wow, this is really cool stuff. So I began to realize how big the counter cross stitch industry was in the South. And at the time, I was designing and painting needlepoint canvases. And with each sale, I had to paint another one. There's no way to mass produce hand-painted needlepoint canvases. So my first thought was, wait a minute, you mean I can design this one time, stitch it one time, make copies in some fashion, and then sell them? And I was like, this is pretty amazing. So that was really how I got into the counter cross stitch industry. So at the time, my fabric choices were 14 count Aida in white or ecru. That was it. They were my two choices. And I had the sampler I wanted to reproduce. And so I took a piece of ecru 14 count Aida, and I dyed it with tea and coffee until I got it to a color that I thought looked like an antique. And that wasn't all that unusual at that time. Now, I am not saying that in the late 70s and early 80s that there were not more colors available, but there certainly were not the wide range of colors available now. And I will also say, in my defense, that once I did produce it, many experts in the industry said, oh, it's good that you stitch this on Aida because nobody stitches on linen. Wow. I mean, that was not an uncommon statement at the time. So that just gives you a little glimpse into what my world was like. I mean, I felt like I had blinders on, that I just was not aware of everything that was out there. And it really, that has stayed with me, to realize and recognize that the average cross-stitch enthusiast does not have at her fingertips everything that's available to designers. And if you don't live near a needlework store, then you're really at a disadvantage. It is hard to order fabric and threads online. I understand that, because let me back up. If you have a chart and you say, okay, I want to stitch this exact thing, and the designer, of course, has said the model is stitched on such and such a fabric, and these are the threads that are used, then that's pretty easy. You just go and you order the same thing. But if you're trying to create something of your own creativity, then colors, first of all, colors from what they truly look like and a photo can be different. Then there's a difference between what you see on your computer screen and what was in that original photo. So these are all things that make it a challenge. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but my heart goes out to you when people say, it's hard to order online. I get that. I truly do. So I decided last week that I would order all the variegated flosses in the Cosmo line. I've had the solid ones for a while, but I really would like to play around with the variegateds. And so I took the plunge and ordered a box of every color. And I'll talk more about that next week. So for the first time ever, I'm going to give you a heads up. Next week, we're going to talk about variegateds. When it comes to threads, we had, of course, solid colored 6-strand floss, and we had variegated floss, and we had some new hand-painted threads. The first company I was ever aware of that did them was Karen Collection from up in New England, and still a company that does a splendid job with wildflowers, which is a flower thread weight, with watercolors, which is a pearl thread weight, with water lilies, which is a silk, and they're just absolutely gorgeous. And of course, you're aware of all the other companies, Weeks Dye Works, Gentle Arts, etc., that have a wonderful array of overdyes to offer you. Because frankly, just like, faced with stitching everything on white or ecru 14 count Aida, when it came to trying to sort of soften some of the solids, we designers started using a process we called tweeting, where we would take 2 strands of 2 different but similar colors, like a pale pink and a medium pink. If we couldn't find a color that was in between them that we really liked, and so we would stitch with one each of those, and we called it tweeting. And I'm sure there's still designs out there that use that. So stitching with over dyes and variegated threads is a lot more widely called for in designs, but I still see lots of questions from people about how to stitch with them. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about next week. Like I said, I just took the big plunge and got the full set of Cosmo variegated, what they call seasons, as in the 4 seasons. I think that's why they call it that, not seasons like herbs and spices. Anyway, I should find out about that. So that's what I'm going to be talking about next week. But for now, what I want to do is to show you one of my absolute favorite stitches, and that's the long arm cross stitch. And I use it a lot. Here in the grape sampler, I used the long arm cross stitch in this border right here. Let me thread up a needle and get a piece of linen, and I will show you how to do the long arm cross stitch. The long arm cross stitch can be started with a loop method or with a buried waist knot. I've elected to start mine with a loop method, so I've simply taken my half cross and then slipped my needle through the loop on the back. So that is the first step of a long arm cross stitch. It looks like a backwards half cross stitch. The second part of this is where it gets its name. So one arm of the cross stitch is the regular length and the other one is longer. So this first stitch is 2 threads high and 2 threads wide. The next one is 2 threads high and 4 threads wide. So that's one complete long arm cross stitch. I'm going to layer that with another one. So now this one, the short arm, the first step, is going to cross that long arm. Then I'm going to come into this shared hole to make another long arm. So again, this one is going to cross 2, 3, 4 threads and still be 2 threads high. Now this stitch can be done on Aida. So on Aida, the first half cross is going to cross 1 square, just as I'm doing 2 threads high and 2 threads wide with the first one. But then the second one would cross the first square and the next square. And then you just keep going along in that same fashion. First with a short arm, and then with a long arm. Now you know I like to use the sewing method whenever I can. So let me show you what the stitch looks like with the sewing method. When I'm sewing, I'm going to scoop up these 2 threads on my needle and then come ahead 2 threads. Scoop up these 2 threads on my needle. Whoops, got tangled up there for a second. So I'm going backwards by 2 threads and then going forward by 2 threads. Scooping up these 2 threads back here. And then going ahead 2 threads. Let's take a look at what it looks like on the back. On the back, I have a series of upright stitches, other than where I started with the loop method. So on the back, you should have a series of straight up and down stitches like this. What I like about the long arm cross stitch, let me see if I can get my lighting here right. It really ends up looking sort of like a little braid when you're done. It has a really nice texture to it. I'm so glad that many of you commented about pulled thread and left messages for me telling me how much you were ready to try it now. And that was, of course, a good part of my purpose in having that little segment in the episode. So I'm really happy to see that. I could also tell from the questions that there's a real need for some beginner pulled thread designs. Some of you were very, very good in terms of letting me know as a consumer what you would like to see. A design maybe with a little bit of cross stitch and just enough of a taste of pulled thread that if you got into it and didn't like it, then you wouldn't feel like that you had, you know, gone off on the deep end about something. So I've added that to my to-do list on my drawing board, and I'm sincerely want to work on creating a design that's just good basic pulled thread. I do have some beginner white work projects that I just haven't done very good with promoting lately, that I think that I will kind of get out and dust off and reintroduce. That brings me to wanting to share with you kind of an understanding of what white work is, or at least this is my understanding of it. Remember, I am not the needlework expert, and I don't ever pretend to be so, but here's how I look at it. To me, white work is like a huge, huge umbrella. And under that umbrella, you have things like hardanger, which is its own category of white work. You have things like hedebow, reticella, cut work. These are all types of white work, and there are many, many more. So think of them as being like little things under those umbrellas. And then like when you look at hardanger, within hardanger, there are different stitches and techniques. Like I know the cluster block is like what they consider the building block of hardanger. And I don't know a whole lot about it beyond that, other than to respect it and to love it and to know that there's a huge following of people who love to do hardanger. So as I said, we've got like hardanger, hedebow, reticella, cut work. And to me, one of those things under that category of white work is pulled and drawn thread work. And they very often are smushed together as being one thing. And people will say pulled and drawn thread work. Like it's like, you know, like peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So there are pulled thread stitches and there are drawn thread stitches. And they are very often used together in a design. In the design that I've shown you before, that I've nicknamed and I'm now calling the Melbourne Sampler, uses both pulled thread and drawn thread techniques. Here is the simplest definition of the two terms. So pulled thread is when you stitch in such a way that you're pulling the linen threads together to create a pattern. You typically, your eye is not drawn to the stitches. Your eye is drawn to the laciness that is created from those pulled thread stitches. Drawn thread, think of the word withdraw. You have withdrawn threads from the sampler, and you then take a threaded needle and do all kinds of magical things with those, with what is left. The threads can be withdrawn in one direction or the other. You can take all the sideways threads out of a certain section. You can take the horizontal threads out of a section. You can even take some of both out of a section and then do all kinds of incredible things with it. Drawn thread work, of the two parts of that, to me, drawn thread is a little bit more complicated, not beyond the reach of any stitcher that I know. It just takes maybe a little bit more patience. But my gosh, the work that can be created with pulled and drawn thread is just absolutely mind-boggling. And I'm going to find some photos that are not copyright protected that I can insert here just to give you an idea. What you're seeing is not my work. So that just kind of gives you a little bit of a lesson about white work in general and pulled and drawn thread work in particular. So when you're doing pulled and drawn thread work, you are doing white work. And the person sitting next to you who's doing hardanger, they're also doing white work. And yet what you're doing looks very, very different. So, okay. Questions. So one of the questions, specific questions I got was from Ava. I hope I'm saying your name right, Ava. Who asked me, could white work be done on Aida? And the general answer to that is no. You cannot do pulled thread work on Aida simply because Aida is woven in such a way to help you, the stitcher, keep your tension even. It's woven in such a way that you can't pull the ground cloth threads close together. It's just physically impossible to do it. And that's why even among the various linens that are out there, there are some linens that are better for pulled thread work than others, simply because if it's closely woven, then you don't have the space available to pull those threads together. I'm repeating myself. I realize that because I said a little bit of this last week, but I think it bears repeating. So that's why Aida is not a good choice for things like pulled thread work. And it certainly would not be possible to do drawn thread work with it. You can get some tonal and tone looks with Aida. And you could certainly get some beautiful work done on Aida. But pulled and drawn thread work is not... Actually, let me say that backwards. Aida is not woven with the purpose of being used for pulled and drawn thread work. That's probably the best way to say it. And I got questions from, let's see, I remember one was from Sandra, one was from Christina, and there were others who asked me to share Hannah's butter cookie recipe. And I did end up putting it in the video description for last week's, but I'm going to put it in this description too, because it really is, it's just a wonderful recipe. And I love it, and I love the idea of sharing it with you. Those who bake in my family have been making Hannah's butter cookies since I was 5 years old. So that's 65 plus years of Hannah's butter cookies every Christmas, and they're yummy. They really are good. So if you decide to bake them now or for the holidays, let me know how you like them. So if you want to do Hearts Come Home at Christmas and stitch along with me now or anytime in the future, please do mosey on over to my Etsy store and do the PDF download, or later on this month, then you'll be able to get it in your local needlework shop, I hope. And whenever possible, do support those local needlework stores. They are there for you, and we need to be there for them. So I do encourage you to support them. And obviously I'd love you to go in there and buy my designs, but it's just good to go in there and buy anybody's designs. And of course, that's a great place for fabric and threads, and accessories and just that camaraderie that we get when we get to spend time with other stitchers. So I hope you get a chance to do that sometime soon. But the important thing is, wherever you are, I hope that you stitch happy and stay safe. I'll see you next week.